The dust swept across the main street of Yuba City, California, the same way it had every day for the past 3 years of Eliza Morley's life in this frontier town. But today, the dust carried something different, whispers of a man who'd ridden in with the dawn, a stranger whose arrival stirred the kind of gossip that traveled faster than any stagecoach. Eliza watched from the window of her dress shop as the tall figure tied his horse outside the saloon, his wide-brimmed hat pulled low over his face, hiding everything but the firm set of his jaw. It was 1875, and life in the West had hardened Eliza in ways she never expected when she'd left Boston 5 years ago, following the death of her husband during a cholera outbreak. At 32, she'd built a respectable business and a quiet life, though the emptiness in her home echoed the emptiness she carried within. 3 miscarriages before her husband's death had left her with a painful certainty. She would never have children of her own. Eliza turned from the window, straightening the bolts of fabric on her shelves. The bell above her door jingled and Mrs. Peterson bustled in, her round face flushed with excitement. "Have you seen him yet?" she asked without preamble. "Seen who?" Eliza responded, though she knew exactly whom Mrs. Peterson meant. "The cowboy. They say he drove a herd all the way from Texas, sold them for a small fortune in San Francisco, and now he's looking to settle somewhere. Imagine that, a wealthy bachelor in Yuba City." Mrs. Peterson fanned herself dramatically. "And handsome too, from what I glimpsed." Eliza smiled politely. "I'm sure he'll be the talk of Sunday's church service." "Oh, he certainly will." Mrs. Peterson leaned closer. "They say his name is Garrett Wilson." Eliza nodded, feigning interest while measuring fabric for Mrs. Peterson's new curtains. She'd long since stopped entertaining thoughts of remarrying. Her life was orderly now, predictable in its solitude. What she didn't know was how completely that order was about to be disrupted. 3 days later, Eliza was locking up her shop when a commotion down the street caught her attention. A crowd had gathered outside Doc Sullivan's office. Concerned, she hurried toward the group where Sheriff Thomas stood with a grim expression. "What's happened?" she asked Martha Jenkins, who stood at the edge of the crowd. "Stagecoach robbery," Martha whispered. "Driver killed, passengers robbed." One of the passengers was a woman traveling with 2 young children. "She's been shot." Eliza's heart sank. "The children, unharmed, physically at least, they're inside with Doc and that new fellow Wilson." As if summoned by his name, the door to Doc Sullivan's office opened, and the cowboy she'd seen days earlier emerged. Up close, Garrett Wilson was even more imposing, tall and broad-shouldered, with a face weathered by sun and wind. But it was his eyes that caught Eliza's attention, deep blue, and filled with a sorrow that seemed to reach beyond the day's tragedy. Behind him stood 2 small children, a boy no more than 6 and a girl perhaps 4 years old. Their faces were smudged with dirt and tears, their clothes dusty from the road. Doc Sullivan followed, his voice low as he addressed the sheriff. "The woman's not going to make it. Bullets too close to her heart. She's asking for someone to take the children." The crowd murmured uncomfortably. Times were hard, and most families struggled to feed the mouths they already had. Eliza found herself moving forward before she could think. "I can take them. For now, at least." All eyes turned to her. The cowboy Garrett studied her with an intensity that made her straighten her spine. "You have family to help?" he asked, his voice deep but gentle. "I live alone," she admitted. "But I have room and they need somewhere to stay." The children clung to each other, eyes wide with fear and confusion. Doc Sullivan nodded. "Their mother might like to know they'll be cared for, Mrs. Morley is a respectable widow," he added for Garrett's benefit. Garrett knelt before the children. "This kind lady is going to give you a place to stay while your mama rests. Would that be all right?" The boy looked at Eliza suspiciously. "Will we see Mama soon?" Garrett's jaw tightened. "We'll talk about that later, partner." Eliza felt a lump form in her throat. "My house is just down the street. I have cookies and you can each have your own bed tonight." The little girl's lip trembled. "I want Mama." "I know, sweetheart." Eliza said softly, holding out her hand. "What's your name?" "Sarah," the girl whispered, "and that's my brother James. I'm Eliza. Would you come with me, Sarah and James? We can come back to see your mother tomorrow, but tomorrow would come too late." Before dawn, a knock at Eliza's door brought the news that the children's mother had passed in the night. Her name had been Helen Carter, traveling from Sacramento to live with a cousin after her husband's death. The cousin's location was unknown. What will happen to them? Eliza asked the sheriff, her voice low so the sleeping children wouldn't hear. "Orphanage in Sacramento, most likely," Sheriff Thomas replied. "I'll arrange transport with the next stagecoach heading that way." Eliza glanced toward the bedroom where Sarah and James slept, exhausted from crying themselves to sleep. "They've just lost everything. Couldn't they stay here for a while, at least until you locate their cousin?" Before the sheriff could answer, another figure appeared on her porch, Garrett Wilson, his hat in his hands. "Madam," he nodded respectfully, "I was just checking on the little ones." "They're sleeping," she replied. "They don't know yet about their mother." Garrett's eyes darkened. "Those bastards, excuse my language, they didn't have to shoot her. She gave them everything she had," the sheriff sighed. "Wilson here tracked them a ways after finding the stagecoach, lost their trail near the river." "I'll find them," Garrett said with quiet determination. "But first, those children need looking after." "I was just telling Mrs. Morley they'll need to go to the orphanage in Sacramento," the sheriff explained. Something flickered across Garrett's face. "An orphanage," he looked at Eliza. "You seemed willing to take them in last night." "I am," Eliza said quickly. "But the sheriff thinks, I think a single woman has enough to manage with her shop without adding 2 traumatized children to her responsibilities," Sheriff Thomas interjected. Garrett stood straighter. "What if she had help?" Both Eliza and the sheriff stared at him. "What are you suggesting, Mr. Wilson?" Eliza asked carefully. "I'm buying the old Peterson ranch," Garrett said. "I came to California looking for a place to settle down. I've seen enough of those orphanages during the war. No child deserves that if there's another way." He looked directly at Eliza, and something in his gaze made her breath catch. "Those children need a mother's care," he continued, "and I reckon I could provide for them, give them a stable home, but they need more than that." Eliza found her voice. "Are you proposing some kind of arrangement, Mr. Wilson?" "I'm proposing we give those children what they need, a family, even if it's one we have to piece together." The sheriff looked between them, eyebrows raised. "You two barely know each other." "I know enough," Garrett said firmly. "I know Mrs. Morley stepped forward when no one else would. I know those children trust her already." "This is highly irregular," the sheriff protested. "So is life," Garrett replied. He turned back to Eliza. "Think about it, Mrs. Morley. I won't pressure you. But before you decide, you should know why this matters so much to me." When the sheriff left, Garrett remained on Eliza's porch. She invited him in for coffee, conscious of the 2 sleeping children and the impropriety of entertaining a man in her home alone. "I grew up in an orphanage in St. Louis," Garrett told her as they sat at her kitchen table. "My mother died in childbirth, my father in a mining accident when I was 4. I know what those places are like, even the good ones." Eliza studied him over her coffee cup. "And you'd be willing to take responsibility for 2 children you've never met before yesterday? Wouldn't be the first time I've had to step up for someone else's young uns," he said. "During the war, I found a family mother dead, father conscripted, 3 children alone in their cabin. I got them to their grandparents in Kentucky before rejoining my regiment." "You fought for the Union?" "Yes, madam. Illinois 7th Cavalry," Eliza nodded slowly. "I still don't understand what you're proposing exactly." Garrett set down his coffee cup. "A partnership to start." "I have the ranch, but it's no place for children without a woman's touch. You have a way with them, I saw how you calmed them yesterday, but you have your shop to run." "So what are you suggesting?" "Marriage," he said simply. "Not a love match, though I have nothing but respect for you, Mrs. Morley. A practical arrangement for the sake of those children." Eliza's coffee cup clattered against its saucer. "Mr. Wilson, we've only just met." I know it sounds crazy, he admitted. But I've learned to trust my instincts and they're telling me this is right. Those children need us, both of us. And what happens when their cousin is found? If that happens, we'll cross that bridge. But orphan children often get lost in the shuffle. I won't let that happen to them if I can help it. Before Eliza could respond, a small voice came from the doorway. Where's Mama? James stood there, his hair tousled from sleep, his sister peering around him with wide eyes. Eliza and Garrett exchanged a look that contained a world of understanding. In that moment, something shifted between them, a connection forged in the face of these children's grief. Eliza held out her arms and both children came to her. As she held them, Garrett knelt beside her chair. Your mama was very brave, he said gently, and she loved you very much. Tears welled in Sarah's eyes. She's not coming back, is she? Eliza tightened her embrace as the little girl began to sob. No, sweetheart, she's gone to heaven. James's face hardened with the effort of not crying. What's going to happen to us now? Garrett looked at Eliza, a question in his eyes. She gave an almost imperceptible nod. How would you feel about staying here in Yuba City? Garrett asked the boy. Mrs. Morley and I want to take care of you. Both of you, James asked suspiciously. Yes, Eliza said, surprised by the certainty in her voice. Mr. Wilson has a ranch with horses. And I have a shop in town where I make dresses. But you're not our parents, James said, his lower lip trembling despite his attempt at bravery. No, Garrett agreed. And we would never try to replace your parents, but we can still be a family if you'll let us. Sarah looked up at Eliza. Can I call you Mama? I don't want to forget my real Mama, but… Eliza's heart nearly burst. Oh, sweetheart, you can call me whatever makes you comfortable. James wasn't convinced. Why would you want us? Nobody wants extra kids. Garrett's expression grew serious. That's not true, son. Some folks just haven't found the right children yet. 2 days later, after the children's mother was laid to rest in the town cemetery, Eliza found herself standing before Reverend Baker in a hastily arranged ceremony. Her blue dress, the best she owned, had been quickly altered for the occasion. Garrett stood beside her in a clean black coat, his usually unruly hair slicked down. The children watched from the front pew, Sarah clutching a small bouquet of wildflowers that matched the ones Eliza carried. Marriage is not to be entered into unadvisedly or lightly, Reverend Baker intoned, giving them both a pointed look that acknowledged the unusual circumstances. But when Eliza looked up at Garrett, she saw nothing but steady resolve in his eyes. This strange marriage of convenience was, in its own way, built on something more substantial than many love matches, a shared purpose, a commitment to those children that transcended their own needs. I do, she said clearly when the time came, surprising herself with how right the words felt. I now pronounce you man and wife, Reverend Baker declared. Mr. Wilson, you may kiss your bride. Garrett hesitated, then leaned down to place a gentle, chaste kiss on her lips. It lasted only a second, but Eliza felt an unexpected warmth spread through her. After the ceremony, Garrett took them all to the ranch he'd purchased, the old Peterson place, 3 miles outside of town. The house was solid but neglected, with 4 bedrooms and a large kitchen. The barn needed repairs and the corral fence had collapsed in several places. It needs work, Garrett acknowledged as he carried Sarah on his shoulders around the property. But it's good land. The creek never runs dry, even in summer. James ran ahead, exploring every corner of the place with the resilience of youth. His grief wasn't gone. Eliza had heard him crying softly at night, but children had a remarkable capacity to embrace the present moment. Will you give up your shop? Garrett asked as they watched James climb onto the corral fence. No, Eliza said. I've worked too hard for it. But I'll need to find someone to help there, so I can spend more time here with the children. We'll make it work, Garrett promised. The children can come with me some days when I'm not working with the horses, and I plan to hire help for the ranch once I get things going. That night, after the children were asleep in their new rooms, Eliza stood awkwardly in the doorway of what was now the master bedroom. I can sleep in one of the other rooms, Garrett offered, seeing her discomfort. There are only 4 bedrooms and the children each need their own space, Eliza said practically. The 4th room should be kept for guests. I can sleep in the barn until we figure things out. Don't be ridiculous, the bed is large enough, she blushed. I mean, I understand, he said quickly. And I meant what I said, Eliza. This is a partnership for the children's sake. I don't expect anything else. Relief and something like disappointment mingled in her chest. Thank you. They prepared for bed with careful courtesy, turning away from each other as they changed. When they finally lay side by side, a respectful distance between them, Eliza stared at the ceiling, acutely aware of his presence. Thank you, Garrett said into the darkness, for agreeing to this. For those children. I should thank you, she replied softly. You're giving them a home, a future. We both are. There was a pause, and then he added, I know your shop means a lot to you. I won't ask you to give it up. I appreciate that. Another silence fell, more comfortable this time. Garrett, she said, testing his name on her lips for the first time, may I ask you something personal? Of course. Why aren't you already married, a man like you? He chuckled softly. You mean, what's wrong with me? No, it's all right. I was engaged once before the war. Catherine was her name. She didn't wait for me to return. I'm sorry, don't be. It was a long time ago. After that, I spent years driving cattle, moving from place to place. Wasn't ready to settle down again until recently. He turned his head toward her. What about you? You're still young. Eliza swallowed. After I lost my husband, I didn't see the point, especially since. She hesitated. Since I can't have children, she admitted, her voice barely audible. I tried with William. 3 pregnancies, all ended before the 4th month. The doctor in Boston said it was unlikely I'd ever carry to term. Garrett was quiet for a moment. I'm sorry for your losses. It's why I wanted to help Sarah and James. I always dreamed of having a house full of children. And now you have 2, he said gently. Now we have 2, she corrected him, surprising herself with how natural it felt to include him. In the moonlight streaming through the window, she could see him smile. Get some sleep, Eliza, he said. Tomorrow's going to be a busy day. As the summer progressed, they settled into a rhythm. Eliza spent mornings at her shop, returning to the ranch in the afternoons. Garrett worked from dawn until dusk, repairing fences, mending the barn roof, and breaking the wild horses he'd purchased to establish his breeding stock. The children bloomed under their care. James followed Garrett everywhere, learning to ride and help with the ranch chores. Sarah divided her time between helping Eliza in the kitchen and sitting in the dress shop, where she showed a natural talent for sewing that delighted Eliza. They were becoming a family in all the ways that mattered, but Eliza and Garrett maintained their careful distance. They shared a bed out of necessity, but never touched beyond accidental brushes of hands over breakfast or when passing in the doorway. Yet Eliza found herself watching him when he didn't notice the way his strong hands gentled when helping Sarah onto her pony, the patience he showed teaching James to whittle, the quiet dignity with which he conducted himself in town. One evening in late August, after the children were asleep, Eliza sat on the porch enjoying the cooler night air. Garrett joined her, offering a glass of whiskey which she accepted with a smile. The children seem happy, she observed. They do, he agreed. James asked if he could call me Pa today. Eliza turned to him, surprised. What did you say? I told him I'd be honored, but only if he's sure that's what he wants. And he said he'd think about it. Garrett smiled. He's a thoughtful boy. He is, she agreed. He reminds me of you sometimes. Garrett looked surprised. How so? The way he considers things carefully before deciding, the seriousness in his eyes. Eliza sipped her whiskey. Sarah asked the same about me last week. What did you tell her? The same as you. That I'd be honored, but it's her choice. They sat in companionable silence for a while, listening to the crickets. Have you heard anything from Sheriff Thomas about their cousin? Garrett asked eventually. Eliza shook her head. Nothing. He sent letters to Sacramento, but there's been no response. I'm beginning to think there may not be a cousin at all, or perhaps the address was wrong. So they're ours now, Garrett said, his voice filled with a quiet certainty. Yes, Eliza agreed. They're ours. Something in the air changed between them, a recognition of the family they'd created, unexpected but now precious to them both. Eliza, Garrett said, his voice low. I know this isn't what you expected from life, it's better, she interrupted. Different but better. He looked at her, surprise and something warmer in his eyes. Even being married to a stranger, you're hardly a stranger anymore, Garrett Wilson. His eyes held hers for a long moment. No, I suppose I'm not. When they went to bed that night, the careful distance between them seemed smaller somehow. The following Saturday, Eliza was working late at her shop when Mrs. Peterson came in, her expression troubled. Eliza, dear, have you heard the news? What news? They've caught the men who robbed the stagecoach. Sheriff Thomas and that husband of yours tracked them to a camp near the river. Eliza's heart raced. Is Garrett all right? He didn't tell me he was going with the sheriff. He's fine, Mrs. Peterson assured her. Though I hear there was quite a gunfight. 2 of the robbers dead, the 3rd wounded but captured. They're bringing him back to stand trial. Relief washed over Eliza, followed quickly by anger that Garrett had put himself in danger without telling her. When she arrived home, she found him at the kitchen table, his shirt sleeve rolled up as he examined a graze on his arm. You're hurt, she said, dropping her basket and hurrying to his side. It's nothing. Bullet just nicked me. Mrs. Peterson told me what happened. Why didn't you tell me you were going after those men? Garrett looked surprised at her vehemence. The sheriff asked for my help tracking them. I didn't want to worry you. Worry me? Garrett, you could have been killed. What would I have told the children? The realization of what she'd said of how much he had come to mean to all of them hung in the air between them. I'm sorry, he said softly. You're right. I should have told you. She took a deep breath, then went to get clean bandages and whiskey to clean the wound. As she tended to his arm, her fingers trembled slightly. Where are the children? She asked, with Martha Jenkins. I told her I'd pick them up after supper. Eliza nodded, focusing on bandaging his arm. Did you find anything? With the robbers, I mean, anything about the children's family? Garrett shook his head. Nothing useful. The one we captured admitted they chose the stagecoach because it looked like it might have wealthy passengers. Pure bad luck for Helen Carter and her children. At least there's justice now, Eliza said. Justice doesn't bring back their mother. No, she agreed softly. But it might help them heal, knowing the men who took her from them can't hurt anyone else. Garrett caught her hand as she finished with the bandage. You're a remarkable woman, Eliza Wilson. Her breath caught at the sound of her new name on his lips, at the warmth of his hand holding hers. I've been thinking, he continued. We should make this official, legally adopt James and Sarah, if you agree. Yes, she said without hesitation. They're already ours in every way that matters. His grip on her hand tightened. There's something else I've been thinking about. What's that? Our arrangement. It's working well for the children, but... He hesitated. But, she prompted, her heart suddenly racing, but I find myself wanting more, Eliza, for us. She stared at him, hardly daring to believe what she was hearing. I know it's not what we agreed to, he continued quickly. And if you don't feel the same, I'll never mention it again. But these past months, watching you with the children, seeing your strength and kindness. I've grown to care for you, deeply. Eliza's throat felt tight with emotion. I've felt it too, she admitted. This change between us, his eyes searched hers. So where does that leave us? Instead of answering, Eliza leaned forward and pressed her lips to his. Unlike their wedding kiss, this one lingered, deepening as Garrett's hand came up to cup her cheek. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathing faster. I think, Eliza said softly, that leaves us with a real marriage, Garrett Wilson. That night, they came together as true husband and wife, discovering each other with tender exploration and growing passion. Afterward, as Eliza lay in his arms, she marveled at the strange path that had brought them here, a tragedy transformed into love, a family created from the fragments of broken lives. I never thought I'd have this again, she whispered against his chest. A family, love. Garrett's arms tightened around her. Nor did I. But sometimes life gives you what you need, not what you expected. In the weeks that followed, the ranch house seemed to glow with the happiness of its inhabitants. James finally decided to call Garrett Pa, and Sarah had been calling Eliza Mama for weeks already. Their grief for their mother hadn't vanished, but it had softened, making room for new attachments, new love. The adoption was made official in early October. Sheriff Thomas had exhausted all avenues searching for the children's supposed cousin and found nothing. The judge, seeing the obvious bond between the children and their new parents, had no hesitation in granting the adoption. As winter approached, Garrett hired 2 ranch hands to help with the horses, allowing him more time with his family. Eliza found a talented young woman named Alice to manage the dress shop most days, coming in herself only twice a week. One evening in early December, as they decorated a pine tree Garrett had cut from the hills behind their property, Sarah asked a question that caught them both by surprise. "Will we ever have a baby brother or sister?" Eliza froze, the glass ornament in her hand suddenly feeling very fragile. Garrett moved to her side, his hand warm on her back. "Sarah," he said gently, "sometimes things don't work out the way we hope. Having babies can be difficult for some people." The little girl considered this. "But couldn't we get another one like me and James?" "There are lots of children who need families." Eliza knelt before her. "Is that something you'd like, sweetheart? Another child in our family?" Sarah nodded enthusiastically. "James says I'm too little to play with and there's room in the house for more kids." Eliza looked up at Garrett, who was watching her with a tender expression. "What do you think?" she asked him. "I think our Sarah has a good heart," he replied, "and she's right. There are children who need homes as much as James and Sarah did." Later that night, as they lay together in the warmth of their bed, Eliza nestled against Garrett's side. "Did you mean it?" she asked. "About bringing more children into our family, I did," he said, stroking her hair. "If that's what you want too, it is," she whispered. "More than anything." The opportunity came sooner than they expected. 2 days before Christmas, Reverend Baker arrived at their door with a grim expression and a bundle in his arms. "I'm sorry to disturb you," he said as Eliza invited him in from the cold, "but I didn't know where else to turn." The bundle in his arms moved, and Eliza realized with a shock that it was a baby, no more than a few months old. "What happened?" Garrett asked, appearing from the kitchen where he'd been helping the children make Christmas cookies. "Her mother died in childbirth 3 months ago," the Reverend explained. "The father has been caring for her, but, well, he was found frozen this morning outside the saloon. Too much whiskey, not enough coat." Eliza took the baby from him, her heart melting as the infant gazed up at her with solemn brown eyes. "Does she have any other family?" Garrett asked. Reverend Baker shook his head. "None that we know of. I was going to take her to Sacramento, but the pass is snowed in. The stage won't run until after the new year." Eliza looked at Garrett, a silent question in her eyes. He nodded, understanding immediately. "She can stay with us, Reverend," Eliza said. "For as long as needed." James and Sarah peered around Garrett, curious about their visitor. "Is that a real baby?" Sarah asked, her eyes wide. "Yes, sweetheart," Eliza replied. "She needs somewhere to stay for Christmas. Would that be all right with you?" Sarah nodded vigorously while James looked more cautious. "What's her name?" he asked. "Mary," the Reverend answered. "Mary Johnson." After the Reverend left, promising to return with the baby's few belongings, the family gathered around Eliza and the infant. "She's so tiny," Sarah whispered, touching Mary's hand with a gentle finger. "She needs a family," James observed, his young face serious. "Like we did." Garrett and Eliza exchanged a look over the children's heads, a look of perfect understanding. "Yes," Garrett said, "and I think she might have found one." That Christmas Eve, as snow fell softly outside their windows, the Wilson family gathered around their fireplace. Mary slept peacefully in a cradle Garrett had hastily constructed, while James and Sarah hung their stockings with great ceremony. "I've never been so happy," Eliza whispered to Garrett as they watched the children. He squeezed her hand. Nor have I. And to think none of this might have happened if not for a chance meeting in the midst of tragedy. Do you believe in fate? She asked. Garrett considered the question. I believe we make our own luck mostly, but sometimes I think there's a bigger plan. Eliza leaned against him, watching the firelight play across the faces of their children, the son who had his father's serious nature, the daughter whose laughter lit up the room, and the baby girl who had come to them when they'd just decided to open their hearts to more children. Mama, Sarah called, tell us a story about when you were little. As Eliza settled between the children to share tales of her childhood in Boston, Garrett watched his family with a heart so full it felt it might burst. He remembered his own childhood in the orphanage, the loneliness, the hunger for belonging. He'd promised himself long ago that if he ever had children, they would never know that emptiness. He hadn't expected to find a woman like Eliza, strong, compassionate, capable of so much love despite her own losses. He hadn't expected to father 3 children who weren't of his blood but were completely his in all the ways that mattered. Later that night, after the children were asleep with visions of Christmas gifts dancing in their heads, Eliza and Garrett wrapped presents and filled stockings. I have something for you, Garrett said, pulling a small package from his pocket. I was going to wait until tomorrow, but… Eliza unwrapped it carefully to find a gold locket. Inside was a tiny portrait of their 3 children, painted by a traveling artist who had passed through town the previous month. Oh, Garrett, she whispered, tears filling her eyes. It's perfect. There's room for more, he said softly. If Mary stays with us, and perhaps others in time. Eliza closed her hand around the locket, then leaned forward to kiss him. I love you, she said against his lips. I never expected to love again, but I do. And I love you, he replied. More than I thought possible. As spring turned the hills around Yuba City green again, the Wilson family grew official once more. Mary's adoption was finalized, making her Mary Wilson in name as well as in heart. She was thriving under their care, sitting up now and babbling happily. Eliza's dress shop continued to prosper under Alice's management, allowing Eliza to spend most of her time at the ranch with the children. Garrett's horse breeding business was gaining a reputation throughout California, with buyers coming from as far as San Francisco to purchase his carefully trained stock. Their home was often filled with laughter, occasionally with tears, but always with the sense of belonging they had created together. One warm May afternoon, as Garrett and Eliza sat on their porch watching the children play in the yard, a dusty wagon approached the ranch house. A middle-aged couple climbed down, looking uncertain. Can we help you? Garrett called, standing to greet them. We're looking for the Wilson place, the man replied. I'm John Baker, and this is my wife, Margaret. We've come about the letter. Eliza exchanged a confused glance with Garrett. What letter would that be, Mr. Baker? The man looked equally puzzled. From Reverend Baker in Yuba City. He wrote that you were looking to provide homes for orphan children. Understanding dawned on Eliza. After Mary's adoption, she and Garrett had spoken with the Reverend about their willingness to help other children in need. He must have spread the word. Yes, she said, stepping forward. Please come inside. Over coffee, the Bakers explained their situation. They ran a small farm near Marysville, about 30 miles away. They had never been able to have children, and with both now in their 40s had given up hope. When the Reverend's letter reached our church, it seemed like an answer to prayer, Margaret said. But we don't know the first thing about adopting. We thought perhaps you could advise us. As the adults talked, the children played in the next room, their voices carrying clearly. They sound wonderful, Margaret said wistfully, listening to James instruct Sarah on the proper way to build a block tower. They are, Eliza agreed. Each one a blessing. After the Bakers left, promising to return the following week with the proper papers to begin the adoption process, Garrett pulled Eliza into his arms. You've got that look, he said, smiling down at her. What look? The one that says you're hatching a plan. Eliza laughed. Is it that obvious? I was just thinking. There are so many children who need homes. What if we could help make those connections, not just for ourselves but for couples like the Bakers? Garrett considered this. You mean like a registry of sorts? For orphaned children and families willing to take them in. Exactly, Eliza said, excitement building in her voice. We could work with Reverend Baker with orphanages in Sacramento and San Francisco. There are good people who would open their homes if they knew where the need was. Garrett kissed her forehead. My wife, the visionary. Our children came to us by chance, she said. But what if we could create those chances for others? In the years that followed, the Wilson Family Registry became known throughout Northern California. Eliza kept meticulous records, matching children with suitable families, following up to ensure the placements were successful. Garrett used his growing business connections to spread the word and raise funds when needed. Their own family grew as well. In addition to James, Sarah, and Mary, they welcomed twin boys abandoned at the Yuba City church when they were just days old. Joseph and Thomas Wilson, named after the sheriff who had unknowingly brought their family together, were boisterous additions who kept everyone on their toes. By 1885, the Wilson Ranch had expanded to include a separate building where children could stay temporarily while permanent homes were arranged. Eliza had hired a teacher, and Garrett had built a small schoolhouse where both their children and their temporary wards could learn together. On the 10th anniversary of their marriage, Garrett surprised Eliza with a new locket to replace the one he'd given her that first Christmas. This one was larger, with room for miniature portraits of all 5 of their children. It's beautiful, Eliza said as he fastened it around her neck. Not half as beautiful as the family you've created, he replied. We created, she corrected him. I couldn't have done any of this without you. As the sun set over their ranch, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, they stood together on the hill behind their home, arms around each other's waists. Do you ever think about how differently things might have turned out? Eliza asked. If you hadn't come to Yuba City that day. If I hadn't offered to take in James and Sarah. Garrett was quiet for a moment. I think some things are meant to be, even if the path getting there isn't what we expected. I was looking for a home when I came to California. I just didn't know it would be with you, with our children. Eliza rested her head against his shoulder. When I lost my first husband, when I knew I couldn't have children of my own, I thought my life was over in a way, but it was just beginning. She couldn't have children of her own, Garrett quoted softly, so we'll raise the ones who have got none. He smiled down at her. Best decision I ever made. From the house below came the sound of children's laughter, calling them home to dinner. Hand in hand, Eliza and Garrett walked back down the hill to the family they had built together, a family born not of blood but of choice, of commitment, and of love that had grown from the most unexpected beginnings. As they entered the warm, bustling kitchen with Mary setting the table, the twins wrestling in the corner, and James and Sarah arguing good-naturedly about whose turn it was to feed the chickens, Eliza caught Garrett's eye across the room. In his smile, she saw everything they had been through, everything they had built, and everything that still lay ahead. Their family was unconventional, their love story unlike any other. But as Eliza gathered her children around the dinner table, with Garrett at the head saying grace, she knew with absolute certainty that all of this was exactly where she was meant to be. In the years that followed, the Wilson Family Registry helped place over 300 orphan children with loving families throughout California and beyond. James grew up to take over the registry's operations, expanding it into a formal adoption agency with offices in San Francisco and Sacramento. Sarah became a teacher in the schoolhouse on their property, which had grown into a proper school serving both permanent and temporary residents. Mary studied medicine in San Francisco, returning to Yuba City as its first female doctor, specializing in children's care. The twins, different as night and day in personality but inseparable in their bond, became ranchers like their father, eventually taking over the horse breeding business that had become one of the most respected in the state. And through it all, Garrett and Eliza remained the heart of the family, their love growing deeper with each passing year, their commitment to children without homes unwavering. They had created not just a family, but a legacy that would continue long after them, a testament to the truth they had discovered on that fateful day in 1875. That family is not defined by blood, but by love, and that sometimes the greatest blessings come from the most unexpected beginnings.